Once upon a time, there was a large, lush green forest where many animals lived. The forest was home to all kinds of wildlife. There was enough food and shelter for all the animals to live in harmony. There were so many families of animals, including rabbits, birds, squirrels, raccoons, and so many more, including a large group of foxes. One day, a fox was walking through the forest. All of a sudden, he heard a loud snap and knew instantly his tail had been caught in a trap. The fox was very upset as he tried to get his tail out of the trap. Finally, he pulled himself away from the trap, but it cut off his tail. The fox was very sad, and he had a very sore tail. The fox cried and thought he would be the laughingstock of all of the foxes. He had lost his beautiful fluffy tail, and whatever should he do now? He walked deeper into the forest until he had an idea. He decided to have a meeting with all his animal friends to discuss his idea. When everyone had gathered together, the fox started to speak. "Thank you for coming to hear me," said the fox. "The reason I have gathered you here today is to talk about why we have a tail. You see, we have eyes, ears, a nose, teeth, legs, all for some reason. But why a tail? A tail is such a useless thing. It seems to get in the way. People trip over it. It gets in the way when we sit down. So after much consideration, I have cut off my own tail, and I would like you all to do the same. I feel great now that I no longer have that useless tail." The lead fox and all the other animals were amazed at what the fox was saying. They all thought it would be quite painful and had never really thought of themselves without tails.
Wow.
All of a sudden, a younger fox asked, "Are you saying this because you no longer have a beautiful furry tail? Are you feeling embarrassed and just thinking about yourself? Maybe you are worried we might leave you out of our group of friends." The group of animals agreed that the fox without a tail was being selfish, and that it was very mean that he should ask them to cut off their tails too. He just wants us all to cut off our tails so he won't be embarrassed or left out. All the animals were quite upset with the fox without a tail, and they left him to think about what he had asked them to do. The lead fox reminded the other animals about how special their tails were and how they should always be proud of their tails. No one should cut off their tails. They all agreed. The fox without a tail was left to wander the forest alone, as his friends realized he was not a true friend. He had asked them to change, to make sure he would fit in with them. He should have accepted his difference, and his friends would have welcomed him, instead of being upset with the fox without a tail. The fox without a tail wandered for a long time and thought about his decision. He returned to his forest, and his friends forgave him. They accepted him just as he was. The fox without a tail was very happy to be back with his friends. The end. Once, there was a little farm with a pond full of geese and ducks. On a fine spring morning, a mother duck felt her eggs start to crack beneath her. One by one, all the eggs broke open, with each new baby duckling cuter than ever. Until the last egg broke open. The duckling did not look like the other cute little ducklings. He was gray and clumsy and way too big. The mother duck thought, how big and clumsy this duckling is. But she loved him just as much as the other ducklings. The next day, the mother duck took her ducklings to meet the other farm animals. As soon as they entered the farmyard, the other animals started to call the gray duckling names. "Look at the ugly duckling," said a mean old goose. Soon, his own brothers and sisters were calling him names. They called him Ugly Duckling. This went on for days, and the ugly duckling decided to run far away. He ran deep into the field. He finally came upon a pond full of geese. It was nighttime, so he fell asleep in the tall grass surrounding the pond. In the morning, the ugly duckling was just about to meet the geese when they were scared by a hunter and his dogs. The ugly duckling stayed in the long grass and hid from the hunter and his scary dogs. When he was sure they were gone, he started to walk towards a cottage he could see. An old woman lived there with her prize hen and cat. The old woman let the ugly duckling stay because she thought she could fatten up the duck to sell him at the market. The prize hen and the cat were very rude to the ugly duckling, and besides, there was no water for him to swim on here. So the ugly duckling snuck away one night to find a lake. He found a nice lake, but none of the other birds spoke to him. They thought he was too ugly to bother with. One day, a beautiful flock of white birds with long necks flew overhead. The ugly duckling began to cry, but he had no idea why. It was getting colder, and soon all the other birds left the pond because winter was coming. The ugly duckling stayed and awoke one morning to find his feet frozen in the lake. A nice, kind farmer found the ugly duckling and saved him. He thought he would be a nice house pet for his children, so he brought the ugly duckling home. His wife and children were not very happy with the ugly duckling, and so the ugly duckling snuck away to find a new home. It was winter, and the ugly duckling found a spot on a pond's edge. He built a nest. He was safely hidden to snuggle away the whole winter. Finally, spring arrived, and the pond thawed. The ugly duckling spread his wings. He found his wings grew very strong during the winter. The ugly duckling landed gracefully on the lovely pond. Just as he landed, he noticed 3 snowy swans near the pond's shore. He felt the same way he had had the first time he saw them fly overhead. The ugly duckling slowly swam over to meet the swans. And then, as the ugly duckling swam, he noticed his own reflection. What do you think he saw? His own reflection was that of a beautiful white swan. You see, over the winter, the ugly gray duckling had grown into a beautiful, white, graceful swan. And he was the most beautiful bird of all. The new swans welcomed their new swan friend. The swans were so very nice to the ugly duckling, who was now a stunning white swan. The ugly duckling promised himself he would never forget the lessons he had learned as a young ugly duckling, as he lived happily ever after with his new family on the beautiful pond. A long time ago, Mr. and Mrs. Darling lived in London, England, with their children, Wendy, Michael, John, and their sweet dog, Nana. Wendy was always telling her brothers stories about a magical place called Neverland, where a magical boy named Peter Pan lived. No one ever grew old in Neverland. It was full of mermaids, Indians, fairies, and some wicked pirates, too. One night, as Wendy told her brothers a bedtime tale of Neverland, magically, Peter Pan and a magic fairy appeared. Peter Pan wanted Wendy to come with him back to Neverland and never grow old. She agreed, as long as her two brothers could come too. The magic fairy sprinkled her fairy dust to help them fly. And soon, Peter Pan had taught Wendy, Michael, and John how to fly. Back in Neverland, Captain Hook was searching for Peter Pan. He was going to capture him once and for all. Peter Pan took Wendy to the Mermaid Lagoon, while Michael and John went off exploring with Peter Pan's friends, the Lost Boys. In the meantime, Captain Hook had taken Tiger Lily, Peter Pan's friend, prisoner. The captain demanded that Tiger Lily tell him where Peter Pan's secret hiding place is. Mr. Shmee, Captain Hook's helper, was a bad person, and he helped Captain Hook put Tiger Lily in danger. All of a sudden, Peter Pan flew in and rescued Tiger Lily from Mr. Shmee and Captain Hook. He rescued her just in time. Captain Hook had another plan. Mr. Shmee would find the magical fairy, and she would help them find Peter Pan's secret hiding spot. Mr. Shmee found the fairy, and she was willing to help because she had become jealous of Wendy. And Captain Hook promised to leave Neverland and kidnap Wendy to take her with him. Because of the promise, the fairy showed Mr. Shmee and Captain Hook on a map where Peter Pan's secret hideout was. Immediately, Captain Hook said, "Thank you, nice fairy," and then locked her up in a cage. The captain and his crew found the secret hideout and captured everyone but Peter Pan. Captain Hook lowered a bomb into the hideout to blast away Peter Pan. But meanwhile, the fairy had escaped to warn Peter Pan about the bomb. The bomb went off, but Peter Pan and the fairy escaped. But Captain Hook had no idea about that. Happy with his prisoners, Captain Hook loaded them on his ship. He gave them all only two choices. "Become pirates or walk the plank," said Captain Hook. Wendy bravely said, "We will never join you," as she slowly walked onto the plank. She stepped off the end and vanished into thin air without even a splash. Michael and John looked on in fear. All of a sudden, they all heard Peter Pan's voice. He had saved Wendy by catching her before she splashed into the water. A great battle started between Peter Pan and Captain Hook. Peter Pan won the battle and threw Captain Hook overboard. The ship was now Peter Pan's. Peter ordered his crew to sail the ship to London to take Wendy, John, and Michael back home. Peter Pan knew Wendy and her brothers had to return home. Wendy and her brothers were so happy to be returning home to London. The ship reached Mr. and Mrs. Darling's home and dropped off Wendy, Michael, and John. Peter Pan and his friends were not ready to grow up just yet, so they turned the ship around to sail back to Neverland, with Peter Pan and the fairy too. Wendy and her brothers waved goodbye from their window as Peter Pan and his ship sailed out of sight towards Neverland. Wendy knew in her heart she must start to grow up soon. But no matter how old she got, she would never forget her wonderful adventures in Neverland with Peter Pan and all of his amazing friends. Once upon a time, a lovely mermaid named Ariel rescued a drowning prince from a shipwreck. Ariel's father had forbade her to swim to the surface, but she had to save the prince. Ariel wanted to be part of the human world so badly. Somehow she would find a way. As she touched the prince's face, she wished with all her heart that she could stay on the beach and dance with this man of her dreams. As the prince lay unconscious, she sang to him. "What would I do to see you smiling at me?" she sang. Her father's trusted friend tried to convince Ariel that being under the sea was her home, and she would be much happier living her life there instead of the human world. The Sea King had asked his friend to keep an eye on his daughter. But despite all the king's friend's efforts, he could not convince her because she was in love with the prince. The fish, her only best friend, was the only one who understood her. Her fish friend surprised Ariel with a statue of the prince that had sunk with the shipwreck. "Oh, thank you so much, my friend," Ariel said. "The statue looks exactly like him." Just then, her father, the Sea King, found Ariel in her secret grotto with her collection of things from the world above the sea. He destroyed all of her treasures in an attempt to protect her from the dangers of the human world. Ariel was so upset.
Oh no.
She sought out the help of the Sea Witch. The Sea Witch made a deal with Ariel. In exchange for the mermaid's voice, the witch would transform Ariel's mermaid tail into legs. The Sea Witch told Ariel she would remain human only if she received a kiss of true love before the sunset on the third day. As Ariel wiggled her newly found toes, the Sea King's trusted friend knew he had to tell the king. But he knew Ariel would be so sad as a mermaid. The king's friend agreed to help Ariel find the prince. Ariel's seagull friend helped her find a dress, and it wasn't long before the prince arrived. "You are the one!" he exclaimed. "The one I have been searching for!" Ariel nodded but could not speak. "But the girl who rescued me had the most beautiful voice," said the prince. "Perhaps you are not the girl I have been searching for." Still, the prince helped her to the castle, and they had dinner that night. Ariel made the prince laugh for the first time in weeks, He showed her around his kingdom the next day and was enchanted by her enthusiasm for everything, from horses to puppet shows. The prince thoroughly enjoyed Ariel, and that night they went for a quiet, romantic boat ride. As the prince leaned in to kiss Ariel, the sea witch made her pet eels tip the boat. Then the sea witch hypnotized the prince and transformed herself, pretending to be his mysterious dream girl. She arranged a wedding right away to make sure all of Ariel's plans would fail. Ariel's seagull bird friend gathered all of her ocean friends to help Ariel defeat the sea witch's evil plans. Her friends fought the sea witch and won, and Ariel's voice was restored. And the spell on the prince was broken. He realized Ariel was his true love, but it was too late, and Ariel was a mermaid again. The evil sea witch dragged Ariel back into the sea, but the strong prince would not lose his true love again, and he fought and destroyed the evil sea witch. The Sea King and his trusted friend watched. And the Sea King could see how much his daughter loved the prince. So he granted her wish to marry the prince. All of Ariel's great sea friends applauded as the prince and Ariel were married, and they lived happily ever after.